Kenya is making great strides in its space program. The African nation has launched its first operational Earth observation satellite into space on board a SpaceX rocket from the United States. There was a time when global powers dominated the space race, leaving smaller nations to play catch-up, while South Africa, Nigeria, Algeria and Egypt are making big investments in space right now.
In a single announcement, Kenya erased years of satellite cooperation with the US, and the global digital network flinched. Planes, ships, and tech giants now face a future no one saw coming.
The warning began as a whisper across digital corridors, an unexpected alert circulating in the background of global communication networks. It came from aviation desks in Europe, cybersecurity analysts in Asia, and maritime authorities in Africa before rising into a full-blown international alarm. Kenya had abruptly canceled a major satellite agreement with the United States, a deal that many believed was central not just to regional stability, but to the seamless functioning of global GPS infrastructure. Within hours, analysts everywhere began to ask the same question. How could a single diplomatic fracture threaten the very backbone of worldwide navigation? The collapse of the agreement struck with the velocity of a solar flare. For years, Kenya had worked with U.S. satellite companies to support mapping data, orbital monitoring, and crucial segments of GPS relay coordination meant to strengthen East Africa's digital architecture. The deal had been promoted as a landmark in cross-continent cooperation, an effort that would anchor Kenya's role in the next generation of communications, aviation safety, and remote sensing technology. Yet now, with a swift and startling announcement, Kenya declared that the partnership was over. No warning, no transition plan, no alternative arrangements revealed. The abruptness alone sent shockwaves through governments and tech giants alike. Almost immediately, global air carriers expressed concern about the potential impact on navigation signals routed through ground stations in East Africa. Shipping companies recalculated risk models, anticipating delays in transit routes that relied on precision tracking. Telecommunications companies scrambled to assess whether Kenya's decision would affect satellite bandwidth previously managed through joint U.S. Kenyan infrastructure. And as markets began reacting, space agencies on multiple continents initiated emergency reviews of constellation dependencies to determine how deeply the canceled deal ran into the global system. For Kenya, the decision was framed as a strategic pivot, an attempt to assert sovereignty over its rapidly expanding digital territory. Government officials emphasized a desire to realign national priorities, strengthen African-centered technological partnerships, and reduce reliance on foreign infrastructure. But outside the region, the move was interpreted very differently. Many international observers saw it as a geopolitical rupture with serious implications for the alignment of global digital power. If a country positioned at the heart of East Africa's growing tech hub could pull out of a satellite pact of this magnitude, what did it signal for the future of multinational space cooperation? U.S. satellite companies responded with a coordinated yet cautious reaction. Their public statements stressed continuity, stability, and an assurance that global GPS service remained intact. But behind the scenes, industry analysts acknowledged the gravity of the moment. Kenya's withdrawal disrupted coverage models, expansion plans, and joint data-sharing frameworks designed to integrate African infrastructure into a wider network of orbital assets. Suddenly, companies faced the possibility of losing access to critical ground facilities, data relay systems, and atmospheric monitoring partnerships. The broader concern was not merely operational, it was symbolic. The dissolution of the deal raised fears that more nations might reconsider their satellite alliances, challenging the long-standing dominance of U.S.-led space networks. In Africa, reactions were mixed. Some countries saw Kenya's decision as a bold assertion of regional agency, signaling a shift toward homegrown digital autonomy. Others viewed it with unease, worried about the potential destabilization of aviation routes and communication grids. In an era where digital infrastructure underpins everything from emergency response to financial transactions, even the perception of vulnerability could trigger cascading challenges. Aviation authorities, in particular, warned that minor disruptions to GPS accuracy could amplify risks across already crowded flight paths. Meanwhile, East African logistics companies expressed concern about supply chain delays, noting that even small fluctuations in location data could hinder cross-border transport systems. Internationally, the decision sparked a new wave of scrutiny over the geopolitical tug-of-war unfolding in orbit. For decades, the dominance of U.S. satellite networks had gone largely unchallenged, supported by partnerships stretching from Europe to Asia. But as new global powers expanded their presence in space, competition over satellite coverage, mapping rights, and orbital lanes intensified. Kenya's choice to withdraw from a major U.S. agreement became a flashpoint in this broader struggle. Some analysts argued that the situation reflected a growing desire among nations to diversify their digital dependencies, exploring partnerships with emerging players in the global space race. Others interpreted it as a warning that geopolitical calculations were shifting faster than expected. As global broadcasts analyzed the fallout, industry experts emphasized that GPS itself remained functional. The satellites circling Earth continued to provide signals to billions of devices. Yet the underlying infrastructure, ground stations, data-sharing networks, and regional support systems, represented a fragile system dependent on cooperation. With Kenya stepping away from its role in that framework, the ripple effects could reshape future agreements, renegotiation strategies, and multilateral commitments. The incident forced the world to confront how deeply interconnected digital systems had become and how vulnerable those connections were to political shifts. The aviation sector, in particular, entered a period of heightened alert. International airlines relied heavily on consistent satellite coordination across East Africa to navigate busy air corridors linking Europe, Asia, and regional hubs. Analysts warned that any instability in backup systems, contingency procedures, or signal monitoring could introduce risks even if primary GPS remained operational. Pilots and dispatch teams across multiple continents began reviewing alternative routing protocols, preparing for potential variations in signal integrity during the transition. Even the suggestion of uncertainty caused insurance firms to adjust risk projections for flights traversing affected regions. The maritime sector responded with its own concerns. Modern shipping depended on a complex web of satellite-based tracking, coastal mapping, and geospatial data analysis to optimize routes and prevent collisions. With Kenya controlling long stretches of the Indian Ocean strategic access points, its withdrawal from a major satellite partnership created an unexpected gap in coordination. Some shipping conglomerates issued advisories about potential tracking inconsistencies, while digital mapping companies accelerated efforts to revalidate datasets that relied on Kenyan ground-based signal augmentations. In an industry where precision equates to profit, even marginal disruptions could translate into delays measured in millions of dollars. Telecommunications networks braced for potential bandwidth and relay challenges. Several U.S. companies had invested in shared infrastructure meant to expand East Africa's digital capacity, and the cancellation threatened to sever that expansion pipeline. Engineers and network architects worked through simulations to determine whether latency patterns, packet routing, or atmospheric data processing might be affected. The possibility of increased congestion or slower satellite-to-ground synchronization raised alarms for cloud service providers, emergency communication systems, and financial networks that depended on steady, high-speed connectivity. While economic markets reeled, geopolitical analysts focused on the broader strategic implications. Space had become one of the defining arenas of modern competition, and the breakdown of the Kenya U.S. satellite deal highlighted a shift in how countries approach their digital futures. The incident raised questions about the balance of influence across Africa, where infrastructure investment from a range of global powers had accelerated dramatically. If Kenya intended to reshape its alliances, it could signal a new era of strategic recalibration across the continent. And if African nations began charting more independent or diversified technological paths, the traditional dominance of Western-led space systems could face long-term challenges. Global tech companies watched with intense interest. Many had built future product lines assuming stable partnership frameworks in East Africa, from real-time mapping apps to agricultural satellite analytics. Kenya's announcement forced them to reconsider rollout plans, infrastructure footprints, and supply chain projections. Some companies initiated emergency strategy meetings to evaluate whether they needed to negotiate new agreements with other African nations or shift resources to different geographic hubs. Others prepared contingency plans to maintain service continuity in regions where satellite connectivity might fluctuate during the transition. Meanwhile, global financial analysts warned that uncertainty surrounding digital infrastructure could shake investor confidence in emerging markets. The technological ecosystem that supported fintech innovation, remote work, and digital trade depended on predictable data flows. Any disruption in satellite partnerships risked slowing the momentum of Africa's rapidly expanding digital economy. As investors recalculated exposure, some predicted short-term volatility in markets connected to telecommunications, aviation, and transport logistics. Others suggested that the incident might accelerate investment in local African space initiatives, pushing the continent toward greater self-sufficiency in satellite technology. As the tension deepened, international organizations convened emergency meetings to assess the risks. Agencies responsible for global aviation safety, maritime coordination, and digital standards requested detailed briefings on the status of Kenya's infrastructure transition. They warned that without clear timelines and technical details, the global community would struggle to prepare for potential disruptions. The lack of transparency fueled further speculation, driving media coverage and amplifying the sense of global alarm. Kenya's allies across Africa urged calm, emphasizing that the continent had the capacity to build alternative digital frameworks. Some governments highlighted regional initiatives aimed at strengthening African satellite infrastructure and reducing reliance on external networks. Yet, even these nations acknowledged the immediate challenges created by the abrupt end of the Kenya-US agreement. They encouraged cooperative dialogue to prevent gaps in navigation and communication services that could affect millions of people across the region. As pressure mounted, the U.S. government reiterated the importance of stable international partnerships in maintaining global satellite integrity. Officials emphasized that GPS was a public good relied upon by the entire world, and that disruptions anywhere could generate cascading effects. Diplomatic envoys requested urgent consultations with Kenyan representatives to clarify the country's long-term plans and explore potential paths to stabilization. U.S. companies echoed those concerns, arguing that satellite partnerships worked best when built on predictable, transparent collaboration. In the midst of rising uncertainty, independent analysts began to piece together the broader implications. Some argued that the fallout revealed how precarious global digital infrastructure had become. As more countries expanded their digital ambitions, geopolitical competition could manifest not through physical conflict, but through renegotiations, withdrawals, and shifts in technological alignment. Others suggested that Kenya's decision might encourage a new era of digital multipolarity, where nations built a wider variety of partnerships rather than relying overwhelmingly on a single global provider. Despite escalating global concern, Kenya maintained that the decision was driven by long-term strategic considerations. Officials spoke of building a digital future centered on regional integration, diversified partnerships, and enhanced national control over critical infrastructure. They argued that Africa had for too long been a passive participant in the global technological hierarchy, and that asserting autonomy, even at significant short-term cost, was essential for shaping a more equitable digital landscape. As hours turned into days, the world found itself recalibrating. Aviation authorities adapted routing strategies. Shipping companies updated tracking protocols. Tech firms accelerated infrastructure audits. Governments prepared diplomatic briefings, while space agencies refined risk assessments for signal continuity. The Kenya-US satellite breakdown became more than a geopolitical story. It became a case study in how interconnected, vulnerable, and politically charged the digital age had become. In the end, the crisis served as a stark reminder. Global navigation, communication, and data networks depended not merely on satellites orbiting silently above Earth, but on the fragile web of partnerships linking nations below. Kenya's decision to withdraw from a major satellite agreement exposed the fragility of that web. It forced the world to confront the reality that digital power was shifting, alliances were evolving, and the infrastructure binding the planet together could be disrupted by a single, unexpected political calculation. And as the global community braced for what came next, one question lingered above all. If a single cancellation could trigger this level of alarm, what would the next rupture in the digital order look like? The deeper issue exposed by the controversy was the growing tension between technological dependence and national sovereignty. Countries worldwide began asking who truly controlled the systems guiding planes, ships, financial networks, and emergency services. Kenya's move intensified that debate, prompting discussions about regional satellite constellations, expanded investment in African space agencies, and collaborative digital strategies capable of withstanding geopolitical shocks. Europe approached the situation with caution. Some policymakers saw an opening for deeper cooperation with African markets, while others worried about impacts on aviation and trade corridors. Committees reviewed emergency protocols and data routing safeguards to ensure continuity across the continent. In Asia and the Middle East, governments and major tech firms evaluated how the disruption might reshape future partnerships. Satellite manufacturers, cloud providers, and mapping companies reassessed long-term strategies, recognizing that global infrastructure depended heavily on political stability. African startups relying on precision agriculture, drone navigation, logistics platforms, and fintech tools also confronted uncertainty. Many began exploring ways to strengthen regional resilience and diversify infrastructure dependencies. As analysts projected future scenarios, a clear theme emerged: the Kenya-US rupture marked a turning point. Space technology was no longer an abstract frontier. It was the hidden architecture steering modern civilization. When Kenya stepped back, it disrupted more than a partnership. It revealed the fragility of the trust-based network that kept global systems synchronized. Media coverage amplified the moment. Experts explained how regional ground stations enhanced accuracy and redundancy, warning that their sudden absence could reduce calibration quality and increase signal vulnerability. Although primary GPS service remained intact, the psychological impact was profound. In universities and research centers, scholars dissected the event as an example of shifting digital geopolitics. They explored how emerging economies balanced autonomy with cooperation, and how infrastructure decisions reflected broader global power dynamics. Public reaction mixed curiosity with anxiety. Social media buzzed with speculation about navigation and communication reliability, fueling a sense that a major geopolitical shift was underway. Through it all, one realization crystallized: digital power depended not only on satellites, but on the cooperation binding nations together. Kenya's decision exposed how delicate that cooperation could be. It forced the world to confront the reality that global navigation and communication systems, though technologically advanced, were politically vulnerable. As governments awaited clarity on Kenya's long-term strategy, a new understanding emerged. The crisis had not halted GPS, but it had reshaped global perceptions of stability. Nations began re-evaluating assumptions, diversifying partnerships, and preparing for a future in which digital infrastructure could be reshaped by sudden political decisions. Yet beneath the headlines and diplomatic statements, a quieter shift began unfolding within global industry circles. Technology executives, logistics coordinators, and infrastructure planners re-examined assumptions about the reliability of international digital cooperation. They recognized that the Kenya-US satellite disruption was not simply an isolated event, but a signal that the world was entering a period in which technological alliances could shift rapidly, driven by local priorities or geopolitical recalibration. Companies that once relied on stable multinational agreements explored contingency frameworks, diversifying their networks to ensure operational continuity despite political uncertainty. Aviation strategists emphasized the need for backup systems capable of compensating for regional fluctuations in signal support. They discussed improved ground-based navigation aids, hybrid satellite tracking methods, and enhanced cross-border coordination to prevent localized disruptions from cascading into broader risks. Shipping firms mirrored this approach, advocating for increased investment in autonomous sensor systems, updated mapping layers, and redundant tracking nodes positioned across key ocean corridors. Governments outside Africa monitored these shifts with interest. Some explored cooperative models designed to reduce dependence on single-provider satellite systems, while others considered regional data-sharing agreements that could distribute risk more evenly. In diplomatic forums, representatives debated how future satellite partnerships should be structured, whether they should include stronger transparency requirements or shared oversight mechanisms to prevent abrupt collapses. Meanwhile, African regional blocs discussed whether the incident might catalyze initiatives aimed at creating continent-wide digital infrastructure. Proposals for unified satellite programs, shared launch strategies, and coordinated data processing centers gained renewed attention. Advocates argued that collective investment could transform Africa from a passive participant in global space networks into a competitive force capable of shaping international standards. Against this backdrop, global investors closely monitored developments, paying attention to how Kenya navigated the transition. Regardless of the outcome, the situation made one reality unavoidable. The delicate balance that held the world's digital systems together had been exposed, compelling nations and industries to rethink how they would safeguard the technologies guiding the modern era. This turning point underscored how profoundly interconnected and politically sensitive global digital infrastructure remains.